Welcome everyone to the webinar. I'm Julie Ipe. I'm a Senior Director at the Clean Cooking Alliance, and of course, very pleased to be kicking us off today. This is now the third in our series entitled Transitioning to Clean Cooking, which has been developed by the Clean Cooking Alliance and the World Health Organization as part of the Health and Energy Platform of Action. And our goal for this series is to disseminate the latest data and tools that can be used to help stimulate increased action on clean cooking and better inform planning efforts. Today, our topic is new SDG7 clean cooking data and pathways to achieving progress. So we'll be looking really closely at the latest data around clean cooking and more specifically, the findings of the latest SDG7 Energy Progress Report, which was just released last week. And WHO is one of the custodian agencies of that report, so they'll be giving us a detailed update on the clean cooking findings. And I think what you'll hear is not going to be big shocking news to many who work in this sector, that there is still much work to be done if we're going to come anywhere close to achieving the SDG7 goals. Namely as it relates to clean cooking. So we'll use the second half of our discussion today to look at some of the efforts underway that are designed to ramp up efforts around the energy goals, including specifically clean cooking. So we'll use the second half of our agenda today to talk through some of those efforts. As usual, we have a great lineup of speakers and a packed agenda. So we'll have some opening remarks from Dr. Maria Nira of WHO. And then, as I said, we'll have the presentations on the SDG7 tracking report results, and then we'll be looking at three different efforts underway, namely the Clean Cooking Compact. So we'll sort of look at the principles of those, and folks will hear about how they can get involved. And then we'll hear about the High-Level Coalition on Health and Energy, which was just launched last week. So that's super exciting. And then we'll also look at COP26 and sort of how we expect clean cooking to show up there. And then we'll have a moderated panel discussion with our presenters, and then have some Q&A as well at the end. So just the usual housekeeping items. If you have questions, please use the Q&A function. We'll try to get to as many of those as possible when we get to the Q&A session. We will record the session and make slides available to participants afterwards. They'll be posted on the webpage for the webinar series. Where you can that page is also where you can find information about upcoming webinars. Okay, let's start the show. So with that, I will go ahead and pass things over to our opening speaker here. If we can go to the next slide. And that is Dr. Maria Nira, who is the Director of the Department of Environment, Climate Change, and Health at the WHO. So over to you, Dr. Nira.
Thank you so much. And it's such a pleasure to be in your company again. I think it's many things are happening in the last weeks, many things pushing in the right direction. It's a pleasure to join forces with the Sustainable Energy for All, with the Clean Cooking Alliance, with Kande Junkela, with all the partners we have around the table today. For us, access to clean sources of energy at the household level is clean cooking, clean heating, clean lighting is definitely such an incredible pillar of our health. As WHO, what can I tell you? I mean, the health arguments to move into that direction are so strong. I know that we are all very much converted and probably even convinced by now, but still we need to keep repeating it. It's absolutely unacceptable that in 2021, we still have almost half of the world population cooking like in the Stone Age. And this is absolutely unacceptable. I think if it was only one argument, this would be one. We need to move as well to make sure that these girls who are not going to school because they need to collect the wood or something else to cook, they will be finally liberated from that. That will be an enormous contribution to the gender agenda. When my colleagues from gender, they used to ask me on how can we contribute to gender, I say, you want to contribute to the gender agenda? Make sure that you liberate the girls from the slavery they are now on collecting wood and water. The day those girls will be liberated from that, they will go to school, and that will be a huge contribution to the gender agenda. Of course, in terms of health, you know very well the figures that the almost 4 million deaths is still caused by the air we breathe in the place where we were supposed to be very, very much protected. And of course, we don't want our children to be exposed at the same time that the woman or mom's cooking, and because we know the diseases that they will be carried for the rest of their life. WHO is very excited as well to have you, Divna and Kande and others as part of this HEPA, and I think it was very successful, and I think I need to thank you once again for my co-chair, Kande, for the fantastic opportunity last week on having all of these ministers of energy and ministers of health engaging in a dialogue, plus the head of agencies, providing all of those strong arguments and moving now with such an incredible passion and commitment and being convinced, because you need to be convinced as well on all of that. So WHO is absolutely happy and very supportive. And I'm sure that you will hear more from my team on the technical aspects of that, but very engaged. Now our Director General was at the meeting for 2.5 hours, so it proves as well that WHO is really at the highest possible level, very much engaged. This is something that we cannot miss. And now that we need to recover from this COVID-19, I think we need to use our common sense as a kind of best vaccine for the climate change crisis and the recovery after COVID-19. And the common sense tell us that we need water and sanitation, but we need as well energy, and this energy has to be clean and has to be the one that will not affect our health, but at the contrary, the one that will protect it. So with that, just once again, a great success. Thanks very much. And I hope that as a group, we will keep this incredible commitment and engagement. And I'm sure that the results will be at the level of our passion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nira. And indeed, it's great to be collaborating together. I think we've all just been really excited about all the collaboration that's been going on, including this series. So thank you so much again. Great. Okay, let's keep going. So let's turn over to another colleague from WHO. If you can go to the next slide. Heather Adair Rouhani, who is a technical lead for energy and health at WHO, and she will be walking us through the latest results from the SDG7 tracking report. So Heather, over to you.
Thanks, Julie, and thank you, Maria, for the warm welcoming words, and thank you all for joining. I have the honor and privilege of presenting the new data that was just launched last week on clean cooking and the progress we're making towards this. So I'm going to be presenting the results from the SDG7 Tracking Progress Report. This is a report that is developed each annually with the co-custodial agencies of SDG7, including the World Bank, IRENA, UNDP, and yes, that is an IEA, exactly, the International Energy Agency. So next slide, please. So first of all, why is it that, Maria laid out some of the reasons, but why is it that we as WHO are monitoring the household energy use, and what difference does that make? And as Maria highlighted, that household energy is actually very much linked to public health, both as a risk factor, and it also protects well-being and just general livelihoods. WHO really is household energy use and its health impacts for several decades now, back for the Millennium Development Goals when we first initiated, because we see this important risk for health. With this data, we have the largest database on household energy use based on national survey data, with survey data from over, I think, 1,400 surveys now representing almost all low and middle income countries. With this data, we also produce not only exposure estimates, so we consider the lack of access to clean cooking as being exposed to household air pollution, but we also use this information to help derive disease burden calculation. So this figure that you hear all the time related to the 3.8 million deaths attributed to household air pollution, that's directly related and derived from this data on clean cooking that we produce in the SDG7 progress report. And this data is also very helpful for monitoring climate impacts, as well as sustainability in cities and general ambient air quality, considering its important contribution to outdoor air pollution. Whereas household air pollution in some states can contribute to 50% of household, in some places up to 50% of outdoor air pollution. So it's an important way of protecting the health of people in the broader community as well as in the home itself. Next slide, please. So the big numbers, access to clean fuels. Oh, we passed the definition. So just for your, so yes, so access to clean fuels. So now we'll get into what we consider clean cooking. So next slide, please. So for the monitoring of clean cooking progress, what we have to actually clearly define what we define as clean, because there are many different interpretations and what have you. However, back in November 2014, WHO produced the first normative guidance on what considered to be clean combustion for health in the home for cooking, heating, and lighting. These particular normative guidance found in the WHO guidelines for indoor air quality household fuel combustion actually serve as the targets or the benchmark for what can be defined as clean for progress in monitoring of SDG7, which is a great example of how the health sector can really contribute and ensure benefits from something that the energy sector is moving forward towards. So what we define as clean, based on these definitions, the normative guidance, is this. So we really look at both the fuel and technology. It very much the emissions and the exposure really relates to the actual combustion of the fuel itself. So the device is very important. Next click, please. So for clean, because of the survey data limitations, we can only gather so much data on the fuel and the technology, but we need to use this kind of surveys to make sure that we have a harmonized approach across all countries. So accordingly, we have specific fuel categories that we have reported on as primary cooking fuel or primary energy source. And for the matters of reporting, we consider clean to be considered biogas, households reporting primarily using LPG, electricity, biofuels such as ethanol and alcohol fuels, as well as solar as their primary energy for cooking. That's what are considered households that are having access to clean fuels and technology. Next, please. Next clip. The polluting at this moment, because they're not actually, from our knowledge and from the data that's available, no actual fully scalable clean biomass stove. So currently we consider the more categorized biomass stoves as polluting, as along with kerosene, as the WHO guidelines has a specific guideline against or discouraging the use of kerosene moving forward. We also have candles, for example, for other energy uses like lighting and what have you, as well as unprocessed coal, charcoal, and what have you. So unprocessed biomass as well. Next click, please. So as I mentioned, so the biomass, although we currently count it as polluting for the SDG tracking, we are currently working and seeing enhanced data collection via the WHO survey harmonization process, as well in combination with MTS, multi-tracking framework, which are both aligned, to really gather more data on the specific information we have on the stove and the technology itself. So in the future, we do hope that we will be able to report these more transitional, and we're working on methodology where we can really look at what the biomass fuel compared with the actual technology will allow us to better monitor this transition, the health impacts of this transition, as well as a country's progress towards this. So again, it depends on the technology, but this is the current way that we're monitoring, and this is how it will be used in how it's presented in the next slide. Next slide, please. So what's the big picture? What's the big numbers we're taking home? So basically in 2010, we were at 3 billion people still relying on polluting fuels and technology. This number has not changed over the previous 3 decades. So we were still remaining at 3 billion. So we've been quite stagnant. What progress have we made now? In 2019, we managed to transition 400 million people essentially to clean fuels and technology for cooking. Now this leaves us at 2.6 billion. This is still very, very far off from the universal target we're aiming to reach by 2030. And this, again, as Maria pointed out, we're in 2021. We have many electric cars on the vehicles, but yet we still have 2.6 billion people still relying on polluting fuels and technology. So we really need to accelerate progress. And accordingly, at WHO, we've been a bit deeper dive into the evidence and the data to really support countries in this transition, which we'll present next. Next slide, please. So as part of the tracking progress report, some of the statistics, we look at the trends over time. Currently, the global trend, we basically can say for access to clean cooking is we want to really encourage countries to make progress and put this a positive frame. So we have 2/3 of the population now relying on clean fuels and technology. Now, this is a bit of a, this graph tells us a lot. It tells us progress, but also tells us a lot of concern about equity issues. So we can see over the time that, in general, you can see here on the green line, the global progress has been basically from 57% of the population having access in 2010, we're about, it's 2/3, 66% now. Now, if we look at the 5 most populous low and middle income countries, the transition has been quite a bit faster. We have, we're here at about 38%, and it has transitioned to about 66% over the last 2 decades. Now, if you compare that though to the other low and middle income countries, there has been very little progress. So basically this figure here, this blue figure, shows the progress in all those countries except the top 5 most populous low and middle income countries, showing that we're seeing great progress in very big countries, but not a lot of progress in those countries, those smaller countries or less populous countries. So this is an important message for us as policy, as we work with policymakers and try to inform them that we really need to be ensuring that we're looking at populations across different countries to ensure that no one is left behind in this strive for sustainable development and universal access. Next slide, please. So this slide here highlights again some regional trends because it's important to see where progress is being made and where progress needs to be accelerated and where we can perhaps share lessons and learn lessons from other regions and countries. This, for example, shows that in 2000, we have, for example, from 2010 to 2019, we've seen the greatest progress and increase in access to clean, lack of access or the increase in progress to access in Central and Southeast Asia. They've made the most progress in transitioning people to clean fuels and technology over the last decade. In Latin America, they have made some progress over the last decade, but they've already made we're already pretty close to the full universal target. And we know that there has been a regional commitment to actually eliminate the solid fuels and kerosene in that region. So we hope to see this data reflected in this commitment reflected in the data. Now, the area that we're very concerned about is sub-Saharan Africa. This is the first time actually where we have actually seen that the largest population without access to clean cooking resides in sub-Saharan Africa. Previously, it was in Central and Southeast Asia, but for this year, we have transitioned to sub-Saharan Africa. And in many places in sub-Saharan Africa, the actual population growth is exceeding the rate in access to clean cooking, the progress in access to clean cooking. So essentially, your population is growing faster than the number of people that are getting to access to clean cooking. So this is an important analysis to really show where we need to focus our progress and for policymakers to understand where we need to really allocate resources and focus our attention to ensure that we achieve the clean cooking target, universal clean cooking target. Next slide, please. Thanks. So, and similar to looking at regional differences, this report also looks at the urban-rural divide, which is important as well, because certain policies and certain fields and technologies may be more feasible for certain particular geographic locations. In this particular area, we can actually see over time that the divide, the gap between those people with the number of people, population with access in urban areas to rural areas has actually decreased quite significantly over time. And now we're actually seeing rural population gaining access faster than those people in the urban populations, where in fact the urban populations in their access rate have become rather stagnant over like the last 5 years, whereas rural, we're actually seeing quite an acceleration in the access rate. Now, this particular figure provides specific information on these individual fuels, as these are new ways that we are informing this SDG7 model, is that we have enough data on the actual individual fuels and technology being used that we can use this to derive the actual global statistic rather than specific binary categories of solid fuel versus non-solid fuel. So we can see here with this additional information, we can inform policymakers and the trends in their decision-making, programmatic decisions. We can see, for example, that electricity is growing much faster in for example, urban areas, which is to be accepted with the infrastructure. And we actually see gaseous fuels, for example, really accelerating in rural areas. So this would be important information that can be shared and used as we plan programs moving forward. Next slide, please. So the SDG7 progress report also provides some general high-level messaging about what's needed from this data and what this tells us to move the policy or dial towards clean cooking. So one of the big key messages is that investments needed scaling up. We need to achieve the universal clean cooking target. The International Energy Agency estimates that about $4.5 billion is needed for investing annually to achieve the universal clean cooking target, which equivocates to about $2 per person, which it doesn't seem so much when you quantify it and down to the per capita basis. Something also, knowing this cost is so little that, and knowing all the benefits that can come from clean cooking, the save lives, reduce climate change, the improve livelihoods for women, and time savings for income generation, going to school, and just improve well-being, that this well justifies taking action now. And the fact that they actually did some estimates at the World Bank where the reliance on clean fuels and polluting fuels and technology are costing around $2 trillion annually, based on healthcare costs and lost productivity, as well as environmental degradation. Now, as Maria pointed out, it's really important that we have this opportunity with the COVID build back, that we can really use and accelerate the clean cooking and focus our attention. Clean cooking is a way to really also prevent disease. We can protect the health of the people living in the home and make sure that they build their immune systems and are stronger and less vulnerable to the effects of COVID and other pandemics moving forward. And in addition, to conclude, there's the World Bank conducts a regulatory indicator framework for sustainable energy, and then we've actually seen some progress, which is a good sign of success that countries in the last 10 years, a number of countries have actually started implementing full policies or looking programmatically at addressing clean cooking more fully. And we have about 5 of the 55 countries and had advanced policy frameworks developed and are on their way to implementation, representing about 25% of the population will have access to clean cooking. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. Next slide. So thank you. All this information is going to be available, and I think the next presentation will give you a little bit deeper dive into what's available. But there's also this information is available, as you see, in the Global Health Observatory and the Tracking SDG7 website. So I think I will hand it over to the next presenter. Over. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Heather. Definitely exciting to see some progress, but some sobering results as well. So as Heather said, we'll now sort of walk through where you can find this data on WHO's website, on their new and improved portal, as I understand it, which Jessica Lewis, who's a technical officer from WHO, will walk us through. So Jessica, over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Julie and Heather. It's my pleasure to share with you an overview of our new data portal. Next slide, please. And next. So WHO is the custodial agency for the data that Heather just presented on access to clean fuels and technologies in the home. And we've recently released a revamped website where users can access this information. So we wanted to give you a brief tutorial about how this information, as well as additional statistics beyond what Heather showed, can be accessed. This is sort of the gateway page, and we'll put the link to this page in the chat. And it contains information on the next slide, please, on both ambient as well as household air pollution and the associated health effects. So I'm going to focus today on household air pollution, of course, because that's the relevant focus of our session. But I really encourage you to explore, if you're interested in ambient air pollution, its impacts on health, ambient air pollution in cities around the world, et cetera, to please explore this information as well, because there's really a wealth of data there. For household air pollution, on the next page, please. This is an overview of the different indicators and data that we have on the website. And actually, could you go back to the last slide for a moment? So before I do a deep dive into those data sources, on the right here under household air pollution exposure, we also have a few other important resources. The first is the global database of household air pollution measurements. This is an Excel file which contains data from studies around the world, including measurements of personal exposure, kitchen or room concentration levels for all pollutants that are measured, as well as a wealth of other data that was collected in these studies. This can be a very valuable resource if you're interested in what real world information is available about household air pollution exposure. And we also have a household energy database, which contains the raw survey data that Heather mentioned, which is then modeled to produce our SDG estimates. And so now both of those resources are available from our main page here. And now I'll do a deeper dive into the household air pollution data. Next slide, please. So when we talk about household air pollution exposure, what we mean are the percentage as well as the raw number of people that are exposed to pollution coming from polluting fuels and technologies. So we present both the proportion as well as the population number for people using clean as well as polluting fuels and technologies, and a range of burden of disease statistics, including the raw numbers of deaths, as well as different rates and DALYs. And then we also present this information in the same form that we use for SDG reporting. And if you'll click one more time, please. For example, for the SDG indicator 7.1.2, which is used for reporting on this target for clean household energy, this is the same information, which is also shown at the very top here, but we present it differently to help guide you if you want to access it for the SDG, for ease of access. It's shown here twice. And now I'll do a deeper dive into this number to show you what sort of other information we have. Next slide, please. So you can see here, this is our newest 2019 data, which is the newest available data that was just launched last week, that this is the proportion of the population with primary reliance on clean fuels and technologies in the home. And the darker blue countries are those that have the greatest percentage of access, whereas the darker orange are those that have the least access. And this information for this page, as well as for all of them, if you click one more time, please, can be filtered to view the information at a national, regional, or global level. And we're under the visualization section. There's also a way, if you'll click again, please, to toggle between looking at this map view or a scatter view. And I'll show you that if you click again one more time, please, where you can see here the data, which has a separate dot at the bottom section for each country, and it's sorted by region. You can select the different regions on the right, so you can view the total urban and rural, in this case, the percentage of the population using clean fuels and technologies by country, to give you a better graphic understanding of access to fuels and technologies. And of course, if you'll go to the next slide, please, we also have the actual data that can be downloaded. On the right, there's an option to export and to download the information for all years and for total urban and rural areas. And again, all of this information can be filtered using that filter button for global, regional, or country level information. Next, please. And in addition to these data resources, we also have a lot of related tools and resources, which I would really encourage you to explore. I won't spend time going into them here, but they're all linked from the data page and are, I think, will provide complementary information and can be very helpful in trying to use this data for more program planning. And finally, since this is a new resource, on the next slide, please, we really welcome your feedback. Please feel free to contact us with any questions or suggestions. And for the final slide, please, thank you so much. Look forward to hearing from you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jess. Super exciting to see all of that new functionality. And I look forward to playing around with the data. And as Jessica said, if you have questions, please submit those to WHO. And also encourage folks to use the Q&A function to submit questions during the webinar as well. Great. Okay, so I think now we'll proceed with the second half of our session today. So I think the sort of messaging was very clear from our first half that indeed more action and at a very rapid rate is needed if we are going to achieve the SDG7 goals on clean cooking. So I'm really pleased that we'll sort of be turning our focus now to talking about some of the pathways that we see for accelerating that progress. So we'll have 3 presentations and then a discussion as well. And so I'm now going to hand things over to my colleague, Olivia Coldray at SE4All, who will introduce this session and be moderating the panel. So Olivia, over to you.
Thanks very much, Julie. Hello, everyone. Great to be here today. It's my very great pleasure to take us through the second half of today's program, if you like, after that terrific background and context from our WHO colleagues and of course, Dr. Nira's opening remarks. So very excited to have a distinguished panel today. I will just introduce them briefly now. We'll have about 7 minutes each of presentations from each of our 3 speakers, and then we'll move to a moderated panel discussion. I have lots of questions for the panel already, and we have plenty of room for Q&A from the audience at the end. So please, as Paul's reminded us, it's in the chat, please make a note of your questions on the way through as you're listening to the speakers and panelists, and we'll be happy to take them as many as we can at the end. So without further ado, just to sort of briefly introduce our 3 speakers today. First is Frank van der Vorten, who's Policy Coordinator for Climate Finance and Energy at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands. Frank is a long-time advocate and very experienced practitioner in clean cooking. He's an engineer by background and has really sort of driven the Netherlands' long-standing contributions, including financial contributions to the clean cooking sector. Our second speaker is Dr. Kande Umkela, who will be well known to many of you. He's a member of Parliament in Sierra Leone. He, prior to that, had a long and distinguished career at the United Nations, not least as CEO of my own agency, SE4All. So welcome, Dr. Umkela. We're looking forward to your remarks. And last but not least, Dimfna van der Lans, who's the Chief CEO of the Clean Cooking Alliance, also well known to many on this call. And she's going to speak to us about COP26 or clean cooking in the context of COP26. Dimfna has a very distinguished and accomplished record as a leader in climate, energy and environment initiatives in both the private sector and the not-for-profit sector. So it's a terrific panel. I'm sure we'll be very, very happy to answer questions at the end of the session. Without further ado, Frank, may I hand it over to you, please, to talk to us a little bit about the Clean Cooking Compacts and how to get involved in them. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, just to start off with, could you please turn back the previous slide? Because I think there's a good story there. This picture of myself, it was actually a picture which we made in Ouarzazate in Morocco when visiting the huge solar power plant there. And what I always do is when we visit these type of schemes, try to understand also the cooking patterns of the families living around this gigantic complex. So we actually went into a couple of the villages around this huge solar power plant. And we found that the people, they did have LPG, but in the Moroccan diet, the bread is very important. So they each had, in let's say, every 4 or 5 homes, they had sort of smoke houses where the women would together every week or twice a week bake bread. So really to underline that this is a very, very complex topic. Next one, please. Yeah, so again, I think here the picture is something I'd like to just stress is that, you know, the big numbers have the tendency to make the topic faceless. While especially clean cooking is really about people. It's about men and women and the individual decisions and choices which they made. It's important to look at big numbers, like understanding the 2.6 billion, but I used to have a colleague that preferred to talk about 2 billion, 600 million and one, and then the addition and one to indicate that this is ultimately about individuals. It's about individual people. It's not about just the statistical number. And next one, please. So this year we really have a unique opportunity to stress that we're serious about this clean cooking agenda with the high-level dialogue on energy. The message that we try to send as the Netherlands is that if we go through an energy transition, the energy transition must be just and inclusive. And that's our message in the context of the climate negotiations, in the context of the Energy Transition Council, and saying that we really very much concerned about inequality. We realize that the poorest people are hardest hit, most difficult to reach, and most difficult to tap into new technologies, into new investments. So really no topic illustrates the challenge of just and inclusive energy transitions better than clean cooking. As the Netherlands, you can see our flag, especially on the energy access trajectory. This is one of the 5 dimensions of the high-level dialogue on energy, which we're really trying to champion because of that. We're also very active in the finance and investment side of the discussion. And next one, please. Maybe just to underline is this high-level dialogue on energy is really, it's a unique thing. It's the first time in 40 years on the highest level of the UN that to really have this energy topic being tabled in this dialogue. Previously it was, I think, in 1981. It's an important moment in time, even though I still have the feeling that the high-level dialogue is gaining speed and changing momentum almost every day. So for me, every day there's something new. It's still to be really something like a campaign. But still to say it comes at a very important moment in the run-up to COP, where the whole world is trying to look at climate ambitions, energy transition ambitions, but also with the long-term perspective on how do we reach net zero by 2050. And what we want to do and to get out of this is really action. So it's action oriented. It's intended to deliver 2 main action points. One is a 10-year action roadmap. What should we do in order to deliver on SDG7 in particular? And the other one is, what private commitments can we generate in terms of what is called energy compacts? Next one, please. So that is the reason why we, together with other global champions on energy access, in particular Kenya and Malawi, we took the initiative to launch a call for action to submit commitments in the field of clean cooking. We also issued 9 principles on what we felt that commitment should at least entail. We had a first meeting on May 27th to discuss this and launch this with a lot of our colleagues and friends, many around the table today. And coming Monday, there will be the next session between 7:15 and 8:45 Eastern Standard Time. There will be a parallel event during the ministerial thematic forums to specifically discuss how do we leverage action for clean cooking. Our call to action is really to be crystal clear that we will give a higher political priority to clean cooking. That is really the core of things. We will call on member states, on multilateral institutions, on the private sector, on finance, on civil society, to join us in making clean cooking a priority through submitting energy compacts. So final slide, please. Then this energy compacts, what is it? It's basically then you could say a voluntary commitment. Could be a commitment from a member state, could be local government, could be business, civil society, multi-stakeholder, but could also be a combination of those. And the key thing is, how do we together, based on, let's say, all of the nice words which we're able to bring out through all of our leaderships and our ministers talking and all of the important voices, how do we turn this into more action and really action on the ground to make progress in addressing these 2,600,000,001 people that we need to reach? This is an important moment. Let's use it well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frank, for an excellent introduction to the compacts process. And I'd love to come back to you about that during the panel discussion, not least as SC for All is co-leading the energy compact process. So thank you for your leadership, and would love to come back to that issue. Dr. Jon Keller, may I ask you to take the floor, please, and welcome your remarks to speak to the high-level coalition on health and energy launched last week. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. There are several problems or challenges why we've not been able to solve the problem of delivering clean cooking solutions to households. One amongst them is what the presentation tried to address, lack of data for planning. And so we're very grateful that WHO and others are combining resources to be able to put real good data together that countries can use for their planning purposes and also shaping public policy. The second one that we've identified over the last decade is lack of political will at a number of levels to take the real actions that are required, whether to collect data or in fact to prioritize clean cooking as a major development challenge that needs to be addressed. And so in order to deal with that issue of mobilizing political will, we worked hard with a number of partners, some of them around this table, over the last few years to see how we can set up a group of leaders that will be committed to know more about the challenges of delivering clean cooking solutions, to know more about the impacts as was presented by Heather and her colleagues, and who will be willing to be champions globally, but also regionally and nationally to bring solutions to people that need the solutions. And with that background, we were able to define this high-level coalition of leaders, a group that is composed of ministers of health, ministers of energy, and eminent personalities, but also some of the big leaders in the United Nations system, and of course, the World Bank as well. So we've been able to work together on the HEPA to establish that group, which was launched last week by the Director General of WHO, supported by a number of agency heads across the United Nations. I will not name all of them, but indeed you can see the collaboration at that level of agency heads all saying, look, this is a problem we have to solve. And for good reasons, as presented by Heather, the cost is high. The health aspects, the environmental aspects, gender, but also economic development dimensions. So this group was formed and launched last week. The secretariat is the HEPA secretariat in WHO. And all those leaders endorsed a roadmap as to what we can do to mobilize that political will and what that group of leaders can do to forward it. And this roadmap has 6 elements, and which I'll mention quickly. Number 1 is to prioritize clean cooking within their national development plans, their health sector strategies, and generally their energy access strategies and policies at the national level. So prioritization, accepting that we must treat access to clean cooking solutions at the same level as we deal with general electrification in the country. We must also prioritize electrification of health centers. So indeed, this high-level coalition will look at electrification of health facilities and also clean cooking, but prioritizing both within the national development plans. Number 2, it is to scale up investments in electrification of health centers, but also in delivering clean cooking solutions. Of course, scaling up investments require several actions. including the right public policy, which is another pillar, a third pillar of the roadmap. Defining, designing the right public policy, which in fact requires some of the analytical work that WHO, Clean Cooking Alliance, World Bank, a number of development finance institutions will be doing. Putting those data sets together so we can define and design the right public policy that will incentivize actions by the public sector, but also private sector entities. A transition to the fourth area, deploying human and financial resources to take care of many actions. One is in fact capacity building, so that within countries you have the capacity to define policy, but also to implement programs. At the same time, to do that, you need financing. Some of what Frank and his colleagues in various ministries of foreign affairs or development cooperation ministries or development finance institutions have been trying to do, to ring fence resources that will go into that kind of capacity building, technical assistance, resources, to do the needs assessment, to train people locally how to do that, or to set up what now the Clean Cooking Alliance is calling delivery units. People who can not only design public policy, but can in fact define the programs that will bring the solutions into households, into communities that need them. Another pillar, pillar number 5, is sector coordination, to see how we can get energy ministers and health ministers working together. Many of us know that public policy in developing countries is usually in silos. Yeah, the health minister knows he needs energy, but he's not energy solutions to have effective health service delivery, but not talking enough to the Minister of Energy, and vice versa. Minister of Energy bringing solutions, but not considering how do you do that last mile connection to the primary healthcare unit in a rural area or in a regional hospital far away from the city? How do you design energy strategies, but making sure that it is not just about electrification, but it is in fact also about delivering the clean cooking fuels that Heather mentioned, and in addition, also deploying technologies that can use those fuels safely and conveniently. So that's sector coordination, but even beyond that, you can look at agriculture, for example. I'm talking to you from Sierra Leone. The processing of agricultural produce beyond the farm, most of it requires heat, and it's all they use is firewood or charcoal. And a lot of that operation is done by women, whether it's parboiling rice, or it is in fact processing grains, cereals, vegetables to take it to markets. A lot of that is done by firewood and charcoal. So how do you get sector coupling? Energy minister also talking to the agriculture minister, because indeed the women are using firewood and charcoal to process those food items to take to market. Finally, partnerships. Some of what we're doing here. You have several of us on the panel or listening in that are in various aspects of international development. And many of us operate within countries. But again, we are also operating in silos. How do we build those partnerships so that we leverage more action? So that by combining our resources, our efforts, we have the right data sets, the right public policy, the right advocacy to get the political prioritization that we need. So forging those partnerships is also what the high-level coalition of leaders will do. One thing I left out, I should state, is also lobbying the international community. Even within development cooperation assistance, there is not enough resources set aside for clean cooking, or set aside specifically for electrification of health centers. We already know that 1 billion people have visiting clinics or health service units that do not have access to electricity. So imagine what can you do about diagnosis? What can you do about treatments if you don't have that? Of course, that has been accentuated now with COVID. You need the cold chains to deliver the vaccines. You need the cooling systems in locations, in situ, to store those vaccines. And so we need that prioritization also within development cooperation, whether it's the European Commission, the USAID, or for that matter, bilateral agencies. And we want to thank Frank and some other colleagues who have been pushing this in their own donor coordination meetings. So that roadmap, which is now available in the HEPA website, has the 6 major components, which we are all collaborating now to implement. Finally, Frank talked about the compacts. We need help in countries now over the next 2-3 months to get those compacts done, to help them do that prioritization, to help them raise their ambition levels, to include clean cooking and electrification of health centers in those compacts. But I already have questions folks are asking us. How do we do the compacts? Do we have enough time to prepare them to take them to New York? So I just put that on the table, that should be the next phase, to popularize the roadmap, to also assist countries now itself to include, to prioritize these issues we're discussing in those compacts and getting the actual compacts delivered in time in New York for the high-level dialogue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kande, for speaking eloquently as always, and for highlighting the issues of leadership, coordination, and the prioritization that we need to make. We'll come back to that also in the panel discussion, but thank you for your leadership in making the coalition a big step forward to advance those priorities. Dimfna, it's my pleasure to welcome you to speak to the issue of clean cooking in the context of COP26 specifically. It's sort of always great to collaborate with the Alliance as we do on an ongoing basis, and I'm sure the audience is looking forward to your insights. Over to you.
Great, thank you, Olivia. Wonderful to be here with all of you today. I thought, if we can go to the next slide, I thought I would do 2 things to really move this conversation, as the title suggests, towards what are those pathways towards progress that countries can start exploring, and how do we collectively work with country governments to move into action. And so I'll speak a little bit about our recently announced and launched work on NDCs, and then I'll speak specifically to how we're working with the government of Nepal to operationalize the NDCs and move into implementation. How do we think about financing that implementation, and how do we work through some of these delivery units to actually move into action, as I suggested in the beginning. I think all of this we've put in the context of how we work with countries to get them to work on their Paris agreements and their NDCs, but obviously, as both Kande and Frank have highlighted, there are opportunities to then put this and work with countries to put it into their energy compacts as well. So keeping in mind that what I'll share with all of you today can be thought of as energy compacts as well. Next slide, please. This is on the NDCs, the Clean Cooking Alliance, together with the US government, or the US Environmental Protection Agency, UNFCCC, CCAC, and Berkeley Air Monitoring Group, is leading an ambitious outreach and coalition building initiatives to support low and middle income country governments in achieving their climate commitments through the inclusion of clean cooking goals in their nationally determined contributions, as well as clean cooking targets and activities in their implementation planning. As of now, remarkably, no such guidance exists. So what are we currently doing? Right now, this month, we are finalizing guidance for a small number of governments who are still working on their NDC revisions on how to include clean cooking in their NDC submissions, either through specific clean cooking goals or through placeholder language related to household energy, air pollution, forestry, that will give them an entry point for adding clean cooking to their NDC implementation plans further down the line. Over the next month, we are developing guidance for all governments on how to incorporate clean cooking targets and activities in their NDC implementation plans to meet a variety of energy, environmental, and health goals, in addition to climate emission reductions. We're also developing an overview of monitoring, reporting, and verification options for NDC clean cooking goals, including a template for best practices, details on the methodology supporting the MRV framework, and guidance on how to implement them. With this guidance, countries can better understand the MRV implications, including costs of the different implementation options as they decide them. We're reaching out to a large group of partners, including NDC Partnership, UNDP, WRI, RMI, WWF, IEA, EDF, IRENA, C40 and SC4All, and many others. We're adding new partners pretty much every day or week to integrate this guidance into their work with countries on their NDCs and to avoid any potential duplication of efforts. CCA will hold regular webinars and virtual technical assistance convenings with country governments throughout 2021 and into 2022 to share the guidance documents and provide additional guidance or additional context for countries as they start thinking about their implementation plans. And so a specific example that I wanted to share with everybody is how we're working on those NDCs with the country of Nepal. Next slide, please. We recently submitted a proposal to the NAMA Ambition Initiative for work in Nepal. This work is aligned with Nepal's second national determined contribution, which targets 25% of households using electricity as their primary cooking fuel by 2030. By addressing both supply and demand side barriers while working on establishing a supportive policy regime, the program aims to support effective utilization of surplus renewable energy, reduce reliance on imported LPG and unsustainably harvested firewood for cooking, electric cooking devices, resulting in 500,000 households adopting electric cooking within 5 years, and establish a sustainable market for electric cooking devices beyond the program lifetime. We developed this program in response to findings from foundational research that we have conducted in Nepal over the last 2 years, and rooted in our deep familiarity with the government of Nepal's priorities and goals. This knowledge allowed us to design and propose a market-based approach with the targeted subsidies necessary to achieve these ambitious goals, aligned with Nepal's broader priorities. We see this program as a great example of how we can work with governments to develop programs that align with their broader climate plans. For example, their NDCs, as well as their integrated energy plans, while still being scalable and achievable. Next slide, please. And so specifically for country governments, as they think about moving into implementation and action and actually delivering against these goals, we are also together with WRI as part of the NAMA application, developing what we call the Clean Cooking Explorer. This will be the world's first geospatial data platform to focus specifically on clean cooking. It's integrated energy platform, planning platform. It will help stakeholders visualize and analyze data to support the adoption of clean cooking solutions. The tool will empower users to leverage optimal technology mixes for specific regions based on existing and potential demand and supply trends. The tool is being prototyped for Nepal, and we expect to expand its application further to help additional countries with their integrated energy planning. Using open source code and a dashboard that is user-friendly, we believe that the Clean Cooking Explorer will be a key resource for countries trying to include clean cooking in their broader climate and energy goals over the next several years. And so these examples, I think, Olivia, are really guided towards inspiring other governments and policymakers to start thinking about moving from the articulation of their commitments to really focusing on the implementation plans and what they actually need to achieve their goals, including the appropriate level of financing, as well as additional tools to make their delivery easier and more optimized for what they need to achieve. And so with that, Olivia, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks very much, Dimfna, and terrific that you've spoken directly to the Alliance's experience in Nepal and really sort of getting us to the rubber hitting the road on some of the commitments that have been made, and as Kande mentioned earlier, the support that countries require to translate those commitments into action on the ground. So that's terrific, and thank you very much to each of our speakers for setting the scene so well. We have about half an hour to go in the event, so I'd like to suggest that we convene as a panel now. Frank, welcome back, and Dimfna, please stay on board. And I think Dr. Nero will invite you back for a panel discussion. I have a few questions to put to you, but I'm also keen to ensure that audience members have an opportunity to have their questions answered as well. So audience members, if you do have questions, please do use the Q&A function and insert your questions there, and we'll try and get to as many as possible of them. So if I may, Frank, I have a question for you. Thank you again for driving the Netherlands' leadership as a global champion of the HLD and for being a co-lead on the proposed Clean Cooking Compact. We heard from Heather earlier, one of the key messages arising from this year's Tracking SDG7 report is about money. That's a subject that we're all familiar with, and particularly the lack of overall volume going to clean cooking from both the public and private sectors. I wonder if you'd like to elaborate, please, on the role that the compacts can play in driving increased volumes of investment to the sector, and sort of your thoughts about what need to come into place, or pieces of the puzzle that need to land between now and September to make sure the compacts are successfully implemented later on, and that we have a hook to keep countries and other signatories accountable.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's a good question. It's not an easy short answer possible, I think, but let me give a couple of hints there. I think when I look at let's say as donor representative towards this clean cooking space, we've built a long time on pilots. Where we had in individual, let's say, financing schemes, innovative programs on specific technologies, etc. And over the years, we've tried to bundle them into really a very strong bottom-up dynamics to get to the point of, let's say, proof of concept, to get the business cases ready, to get the finance proposals ready. Basically, to get there where finance could come in a big way to scale up activities. One of the programs that of course has had that function to bundle bottom-up market development and investment case development is the NDEF program, which we very much appreciate the tremendous work that they've been doing. And I think they have gotten us to a point where you could actually start talking about bringing in the private sector and private sector finance in a bigger way. I think as like Dimfna, Clean Cooking Alliance, but also we are putting the same call to our development bank, to FMO, and as well as to the multilateral banks to say, well, this is really getting ready to step in and to make sure that governments have the comfort that when governments start investing in clean cooking in a bigger way, then the international community is behind them. And that is really a core thing. And there was something missing there. So we were very happy with the announcement, what is it, two years ago, and now it's up and running for more than a year, of the Clean Cooking Fund of the World Bank, which also really helped us to say, but can we take finance to scale? We are currently starting the negotiations for the next round of the IDA window at the World Bank. And it would, of course, be a fantastic result if we could jointly get IDA to commit to clean cooking. And so that negotiation is just starting, but my view on this is we're putting together these building blocks and we're maturing. The sector is maturing, the story is maturing. We can really talk now about getting the finance order into play. Obviously, a program like IDA or large-scale finance through the World Bank needs country demand. So it also needs governments to get their act together. So it's very good to hear the work that Dimfna is doing on that. It's also very well heard call from the side of Kande to say that the countries really need support to get to that point where they can actually scale up let's say, where we are in such a way that it can also attract more funding. I believe, maybe it's my worldview, but I believe it's a matter of building that up from the bottom, and we've gotten this far. We're at a pretty good position now to look ahead for the next 10 years. And we have instruments like results-based finance to really trigger innovation, and we can attract government finance, we can attract private finance. So I think where the energy compacts make sense is on the one side is where governments can really indicate that, listen, within our energy programs in the next 10 years, we're going to prioritize clean cooking. That will give a level of certainty and security that a private sector, investment, etc., could all come in. I think the other element of the compact is that we need to strengthen the initiatives that we've taken together. I think there's the leadership role, and very much appreciate the high-level leaders group that was launched by WHO. I think that could really trigger a compact to say, we will provide leadership, but also really the programs that say over the next 10 years we will deliver. On clean cooking, my view on this, and maybe the final part of the answer is this shouldn't be dream figures. So we're building up something. We should, I think, remain realistic and pragmatic so that we know what we're doing and we can also be held accountable to it. In our discussions that we're having on our own energy compact and in the preparation of the energy compact that we are working on, we also have included that our accountability is not primarily to the international system, but to ourselves. So we said we want, with all of the partners that we're going to team up with in our energy compact, on an annual basis to review what did we set out to do. Are we on track? Do we need to do more? Do we need to do things differently? What have we learned? And that element of the monitoring will remain very, very important. But of course, everything starts now with the question, are we ready to speak out a commitment which runs until 2030? And if we add up all of those commitments, are we getting anywhere close to where we want to be?
Thanks very much, Frank. It's good to hear your positive tone. There really is momentum in the sector now, as we know, and it's good to hear that reflected in your comments as somebody who's been in and around these issues for a long time. I'd like to put a question to Dr. Neera, please, if I may, about the coalition. Congratulations again on the launch last week. It's terrific to see that leadership and that level of coordination at such a high and influential level. Given the discussion we've had today around the different initiatives, so the Alliance supporting countries on NDCs, energy compacts now, I wonder if you'd like to offer a few comments about how you see the work of the coalition supporting these other initiatives and working with them with a common interest in advancing the sector. So I wonder if you could speak to sort of your own ambitions for the coalition and how you see it working with other initiatives.
Thank you very much. And well, the question about ambition is the answer is very quick. We would like to have the highest possible ambition. So I don't know whether everybody will be ready for that, but obviously when you are talking about public health, there is no limits to the ambition. You need to be extremely ambitious. Our argument for that is that, well, every year caused by exposure to air pollution, we have those famous 7 million premature deaths. And I will quote Frank or his colleague or friend when saying 7 million one, because I think it's a very good argument to remind all of us that there are not just a number, but it's that there are individuals, they are human beings, the ones that are dying every year. So the 4 million dying because of lack of access to, because of exposure at the household level to indoor air pollution, that is absolutely unacceptable. And means that this is the type of arguments that can fuel a little bit the level of ambition and the speed at which we need to achieve that. Some time ago, we were saying that, and some people didn't react very well to that when we said that air pollution was the new tobacco. And the reason was that, the society was confronted to something which was more or less solvable. And that was representing a big number of deaths every year, for which different sectors of society started to pull together data, arguments, and even economic reasons for it. And it took a very long time, but finally we had a framework convention on tobacco. It was just a few years ago, I'm sure all of us will remember very well, when it was perfectly acceptable to smoke, even in the elevator or even in the planes, remember? Now we cannot even have a little bottle of liquid more than 100 milliliters, but at that time we were able to smoke, and therefore to have a lighter and to have, everything to cause a fire in the plane. So things are moving into that direction. Obviously, there are major differences with the tobacco. We don't want this to take 50 years, as it took us for the tobacco to put, since the moment we knew that there was evidence on the linkages between lung cancer and tobacco, until the day the countries signed and ratified the Tobacco Framework Convention, almost 50 years were passed. So this is the non-tobacco part. In the terms of air pollution and the clean fuels at the household level, the clean cooking, it cannot take 50 years again. It has to be very, very quickly. So our level of ambition will be very much on putting the health arguments on the table. And more importantly, maybe quantifying the health benefits. I think on the financing and on the ambition and on the targets, anytime we can quantify, or at least doing a modeling, a mathematical modeling, saying how many lives are you saving if you do this type of initiatives, and if you scale up quick, or if you put more finance. And I think if for COP26 and for September, the high-level dialogue, if we are able to kind of give a scenario where we can project how many lives we are saving anytime we increase or we accelerate access to clean cooking at the household level and clean energy, and how many lives we're saying anytime we are investing differently on this clean energy, I think it would be probably one of the strongest arguments, particularly now that we need to recover from this COVID-19, and people is very sensitive and very careful about their own health, and there might be very strongly reactive to this type of arguments. So we are very much trying to push in this direction, and obviously aligning all the pieces of that and making sure that the SDG7 is recognized as well as one of the biggest pillars for people's human health. Over.
Thank you very much, Dr. Neer, and thank you for bringing us back to Frank's original comments about the human story here, and actually making this about people rather than just numbers. Time is marching on for us, so Dimfna, I have one question for you, if I may, before we move to the audience Q&A. Thank you very much for speaking again to the Nepal example of the Alliance's work. Just to bring us back to the overarching theme of this session, which is about data, and in the context particularly of the Alliance sector strategy work, I wonder if you could speak for a couple of minutes, please, about how you see the strategy work and the ultimate strategy helping to leverage data and planning approaches and unlock finance for the clean cooking sector. So really the role of data in advancing the sector through the lens of the clean cooking strategy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for that question, Olivia. And I think it is incredibly important. I know Kande always speaks to it with such passion as well, and I echo that passion. I personally feel that in the next couple of years, what is going to be the critical sort of anchor or sort of inflection point is the reliability of the data, but more importantly, how we can start thinking about sort of the impact financing and our ability as a sector to really use that data to increase both companies and countries' ability to access not just climate finance, but other impact financing mechanisms as well. And so within the strategy work that we've recently undertaken, that has become a really clear narrative that has emerged that compared to some of the other sectors, we are still lagging a little bit there, and we're really keen and eager and committed to make sure that we're moving forward. So not just collecting data for the sake of collecting the data and reporting out, but really using that in a creative and impactful and scalable manner to make sure that countries and companies specifically can continue to grow and expand their businesses, which really is the purpose of collecting data, as far as we're concerned, at least, is to really, how can we start monetizing some of that going forward. I think specifically for us, that's also a little bit related to what Frank was also suggesting. It's just the complexity of accessing some of that financing for the countries. And so if I think about the work that we had to do to submit the NAMA application, that is like weeks and weeks and weeks of work. If you think about where one assumes or just hopes that sits within country governments, is because clean cooking almost never has a dedicated department, like one entity that is really responsible for clean cooking, making sure that there is enough bandwidth within the different countries to actually create those applications and submit them is one of the reasons why we're so focused as part of the strategy work also on these delivery units. What can we do to make sure that countries are equipped and ready to move from creating plans towards, as also suggested in the data, achieving progress through implementation of those plans. And so that sort of capacity building in country, not at a global level, but really in country, to make sure that they're able to access the appropriate level of finance and have the appropriate data to plan out how they're thinking about their transition, both for clean cooking, but also just broader energy transition. And I think that's my final point, Olivia. It's like that artificial bifurcation has not helped anybody. And so we're really keen to make sure that integrated energy planning includes clean cooking, because it is the largest household energy demands. And so we need to move away from separating that out and really think much more holistically about household energy needs.
Thank you very much, Timfner, and obviously integrated energy plans are very close to our hearts at SE for All as well. So thank you for making that point so clearly. Look, I have lots more questions, but I'm going to stop and move to the more important audience questions. We have a number of them. Thank you very much for those who have asked. Frank, I have a first question directed to you, please, from Alan Bigelow. Alan's question is, how exactly does an NGO, like our non-profit Solar Cookers International, join the Clean Cooking Compact? It's a leader in the clean cooking sector and it's eager to amplify its commitments. So how does Solar Cookers International, for example, as an NGO, become involved in the Clean Cooking Compact work?
The answer actually is quite simple. Just make one. So the broad invitation out there is to go to the website, and if you are ready to make a commitment to say we are going to work on this and going after these targets for the next 10 years, you can describe that as your draft compact and say, you know, we are going in that direction to commit to that. And then the UN Energy and SE for All team will look at that and we'll see if there are similar compacts that are very close to that or that could be bundled, and and then they will approach you with the proposal to have a further discussion on that. But really it is very close to your own initiative. Is the call is out there to say, well, if you are keen to provide a substantive commitment for the next 10 years, which is in line and which will help us to get closer to the SDG7 targets and the net zero target, this is the time to come forward with that idea for commitments.
Thanks, Frank. That's great. And Alan, I'd please invite you to do that. Welcome all compacts, particularly from civil society. So not just, this is not a process that's exclusive to sovereigns or private enterprise. Very welcome civil society in the compact process. A follow-up question, and it's from Bastian Toyn of SNV, who we know well, to anyone on the panel, anyone who'd wish to take a stab. Bastian's question is, getting central as opposed to local governments engaged has been challenging in many countries. What are hot buttons for getting stronger engagement in clean cooking? Is it mainly health, climate, livelihoods, gender? What are the sort of hooks, if you like, to increasing engagement? And anyone from the panel can take a go at that.
I think the challenge has been that there's almost too many hooks, honestly, which makes it sometimes really difficult to have it focused and anchored within one part of the government. And I think as inspiring and good a narrative it is to have so many impacts that can be achieved when we work collectively to make sure families transition to clean cooking solutions, that sometimes also makes it really, really difficult to sit within one part of the government. And so part of the idea around the delivery units is to actually enable that to happen, so that there are dedicated people whose only job it is to think about what needs to be done at their country level to transition to clean cooking and think about those pathways. So I think it's actually, that's one of the biggest challenges. And I think unfortunately it hasn't been enough with the sort of the energy department, or has not been enough on the radar for sort of the finance ministries or the ones that really allocate the budgets, which is something that the Clean Cooking Alliance is really working on as well.
Thanks, Divna. Frank, Dr. Nira, would you like to make any comments on that question?
Yeah, I do, and good to hear that question from Bastiaan. I think it's a very good question, but you know, I've been working in government now for over 10 years, and I've come to realize that this is also driven by people. So this is not only a technical point to say what is the best strategy to enter. You need to find a champion, and if you're able to find champions within that government system, that I mean, there could be a whole range of arguments why somebody could pick that up as champion, like Dimfra rightly pointed out. But the key thing is, you know, the people will have to lobby and find their way within the government opportunities to figure out where exactly the difference can be made. And that is work from within government, where there are plenty of people that would be probably willing and very interesting to drive this agenda forward. I always ask these questions when we talk to people that are in the policy dialogues. So how did you come here? And sometimes it's just people that have been even frustrated, but they never knew how to approach clean cooking. And I remember the Minister of Energy in Niger was a lady who was very, very keen to get a big clean cooking component in our program. Then it's just, you know, figuring out and talking to many people. So I think ultimately, since this is about people, make sure that the message is simple, the arguments are broad, and get people enthusiastic. Just find your champions.
Thank you, Frank. And I think that leads nicely into a question for Maria, actually, Dr. Nira, about the human element. And the question is, and you've touched on this already, what are some of the benefits of bringing together the health and energy sectors, and particularly from a human perspective and perhaps from a data perspective? So welcome your thoughts to that question.
Well, the benefits are enormous, and we have so many win-win strategies and opportunities that it's just a question of putting all of them together. We have the gender argument, we have the education argument, we have the obvious reduction on the mortality, we have the reduction on the chronic diseases associated to the exposure to indoor air pollution. So it's not, sometimes we are talking about those million deaths plus one. But we need to keep in mind as well that the diseases caused by exposure to indoor air pollution are normally chronic ones that will have a very strong cost in society on those patients who will be suffering the disease, and as well on the health system that needs to pay for those for the treatment of those chronic diseases that will require a very long term. Then, of course, is development. I think it makes sense. All of us, we went through. I mean, we now I spend 1 second if I want to make a coffee. By the way, I would love to have one. It will take me 1 second to do pluck, and then my coffee machine will be on. But for many people, it takes 2-3 hours before doing that. If I can say something very provocative, I cannot avoid myself to share this with you. I was just looking at, I'm sure you are following what Ronaldo Cristiano Ronaldo did yesterday on the Coca-Cola and water. You know what? I love football. I never like it. Until now, I couldn't care less. Now I think I will be a very strong fan. Imagine this same person going to the pump station and saying no to fossil fuel, and then, oh my God, or imagine refusing a certain type of clean cooking device, I mean, the cooking device that is not clean enough and refusing it and putting another one. Wow. So the role of the citizens, as Frank was saying as well, Livna, the role of the demand by the citizens is absolutely fundamental. And when you have good champions, and I think it could move mountains, and the proof that we have it today. So maybe we should start to look for the email of Cristiano Ronaldo as soon as possible.
Thanks very much, Maria. I think you have a solid match to look forward to on Saturday. Germany is playing Portugal, so tune in, as I'm sure many are. I think we probably have time to try and squeeze in one, if not two more questions. They're great questions, thank you. A question for Jess and Heather from Will Coley. Are there plans to produce multidisciplinary data for the interrelated aspects of clean cooking? So for existing data on electricity access, data on cooking fuels are independent of each other. Are there sort of plans afoot to merge or aggregate those? Heather and Jessica, welcome your thoughts on that question.
Thanks. I'll take the first stab at it, and then I'll hand it over to Jess to complement. In terms of integration of data, indeed, we are, for example, we have had visions for trying to perhaps enhance data collection around, for example, fuel wood collection, so that we could actually pair that with the exposure data, so we can really make a better case for the benefits that can be provided through clean cooking access. We are also linking, for example, trying source of apportionment emissions. We're trying to link with example for figuring out how much outdoor air pollution can actually be attributed in countries to household air pollution leaking outdoors. So we're trying to integrate these kind of aspects as well into our data. Now, in terms of actually integrating the specific data for SDG7 electricity access, that is somewhat a bit of a challenge because of the way the data is collected and collated, but we are trying to better, and with this individual fuel estimates, try to see what kind of validation there is across what people are reporting as primary electricity use for cooking, and those in terms of electricity access in the multi-tier tracking framework. But this is definitely work to be done moving forward, but we are definitely trying to really pull more information together. I'd also like to mention that we are, for example, really having this BarHap tool, and perhaps Jess can speak with that a little bit more. We'll be actually trying to use this data on exposure and using that as a tool, comparing that and combining that with climate data, as well as cost to the health system and the individual from household energy use. So I'll hand this over to Jess to complement this work.
Great, thanks. Good idea, Heather. I'll just give a quick note on one aspect of our work with the BarHap tool, which we'll be presenting in one of the upcoming webinars. I think the webinar in July, which is on the benefits of action to reduce household air pollution. It's a cost benefit tool, and it will include information for when you're considering a switch that includes an electric stove to an electric stove, the greenhouse gas, the global warming potential, so the impacts on climate from that switch, which account for the national energy production, where the electricity is coming from. And so it will help make more robust decisions because, as you point out in your question, these data sources are usually very separate. So we are trying to account for some of that as we can. And happy to follow up with any additional information if you want to shoot us an email. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jess. And we're really squeezed for time now, and I'm going to hand over to Julie to wrap up in a moment. But if we have time for one more question, and Frank and Dibra would appreciate any sort of 30-second reaction to this. It's a question from Lars Osterwalder about solutions. So what role generally do we see different technology solutions playing in helping us to get to our SDG7 cooking targets by 2030? So just your very brief thoughts, please, on technology solutions.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in quickly, Frank, and then you should obviously follow up. I think it really, this is one of those transitions where there is not one solution ever in any country. It's going to always be a suite of different options that are most appropriate. Some of them could actually be more appropriate now, but then be transitioned out over a couple of years. So I think it's really dependent on what works in the context of that particular country and from a cost-benefit analysis as well as a health and climate impact, what's the most appropriate solution as countries are thinking about their integrated energy planning?
Yeah, maybe from my side, we've asked that same question to our integrated scenario planners that are also making the scenarios, for instance, for IPCC or for the UNEP reports. And they've modeled transition pathways towards clean cooking, a report which came out, I think, last year or 2 years ago, which is still very valid. And what you saw indeed was what Dimfna mentioned. It's very country specific where you have the opportunities, but there was another striking example, and that was if we succeed in reducing the energy, the cooking energy need, then the shift is much more radical. So as long as the diet is very energy intensive, then the lock-in is much stronger. So it's really interesting to look into these transition pathways, and I'll happily try to find the right way to share that report. And it's I think it's a good starting point to look at.
Thank you very much, Frank. We're right on time, right on the hour. So Julie, may I hand over to you, please, with apologies for running a couple of minutes late, just for a quick wrap up.
No, not at all. Thank you so much. We, as always, have so much content to cover in these. It's hard to squeeze it all in the time that we have, but many thanks again to our presenters today and to Olivia for her wonderful moderation. And of course, thank you to those who have joined us. Another great session, lots of follow-up links in the chat. So please do look through those, look through the new data that WHO has just released and the new portal. And then, as we've said throughout, encourage folks to get involved in the compacts and submit those as well. So yeah, just a quick preview of the next few sessions that we have. We can go to the next slide. We have a number of interesting sessions planned. At the end of this month, we'll be teaming up again with the World Bank to look at how behavioral science can increase uptake of clean energy in developing countries. They've done a really interesting diagnostic of a few projects at the bank. So that should be a really interesting one. And then in July, as Jess mentioned earlier, we'll be looking at the BarHap tool and introducing folks to that, and also talking through some other cost benefit analyses that have been done recently around clean cooking. And then we'll take a break in August while everyone enjoys their holidays, hopefully. And then we'll be back at it in September, looking at fuels and technologies specifically. And then in October, we'll do a session on adoption and adaptation of standards. And then we'll wrap up the year in November, looking at clean cooking and climate as we lead up to COP. So many thanks again for joining us today, and we hope you'll join us for the future sessions. With that, we'll close. Thank you.